All right, school is in session. So take your seats and turn up the volume. It's time for the smartest fishing show on the internet. This is the show that dives into everything fishing, from tactics and gear to policy and product. Here he is, the fishing professor, Professor Sid Dobrin. So stick around, you might learn something.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. Welcome to the Inventive Fishing Professor Rodcast. I am Sid Dobrin, the fishing professor, and using only a couple of coconuts, I'm going to deliver a fantastic rodcast for you today because we have got one of the most knowledgeable fishing experts on the entire island with us in the inshore-offshore digital studio. I am thrilled to welcome Mr. Jim Hendricks of Saltwater, Sportsman, Sportfishing, Marlin, and several other magazines to the rodcast. Jim is not just a leading expert on all matters fishing, he's also probably one of the most knowledgeable experts in boating and marine electronics you'll ever meet. And we're going to talk boats, electronics, and fishing today while hanging out by the lagoon. And after Jim teaches us a few things and tells a few good stories, I'm going to give you the lowdown on my top 10 shrimp imitators. And I got to say, this was a tough top 10 to put together because I've written pieces for Florida Sportsman and for Saltwater Sportsman about shrimp and shrimp imitators, and I have more shrimp imitators than just about any other kind of lure. So picking just 10 took making some really tough decisions. But hey, sometimes it's okay to be indecisive, because if you have to pick, say, between, I don't know, Marianne and Ginger, personally, I'd opt to have them both in my hut. And hey, little buddies, in this episode, I'll also take a look at High West's American Prairie bourbon during the Bourbon Break today, because let's face it, if you got a Play-Doh shrimp, nothing goes better with them than a glass o' bourbon. And let's be honest about it too. If Marianne and Ginger are hanging out in your hut, you might want a bit of bourbon around too. And let me just say that the best line in the history of TV themes, to me, may be the movie star, the Professor and Marianne, and we'll just leave it at that. Hey, I think maybe a quick professorial moment is due here about Gilligan's Island. So we all know from the theme song that the ship set ground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle, with Gilligan, the skipper too, the millionaire and his wife, the movie star, the Professor and Marianne, here on Gilligan's Isle. But we don't really get their names from this, nor do we ever really know their full names beyond these shortened versions. Now, Gilligan has no name beyond Gilligan, but the skipper is actually named Jonas Grumby. We probably remember Thurston Howell III and his wife Lovey Howell, but what about Ginger's last name, or Marianne's? Well, it's Ginger Grant and Marianne Summers. And of course, the professor is Professor Roy Hinckley. Now you know, knowledge is power. And did you know that the parrot that appears in 3 episodes was voiced by none other than Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam, Tweety Bird, Mr. Spacely, Captain Caveman, and 100 or so other characters? Well, now you know that too. So no phone, no lights, no motor car, not a single luxury. Like Robinson Crusoe, we're as primitive as can be. But you can still email me at sid@inventivefishing.com or use the comment option on any of the platforms through which you have accessed the rodcast if you need rescuing. And with that, my fellow castaways, let's get on with it before the weather starts getting rough. All right, so today I am thrilled to have here in the Inventive Fishing Inshore-Offshore Digital Studio the award-winning boating and fishing writer, columnist, and editor, Jim Hendricks. Now, Jim has spent the last 45 years writing about boating and fishing for some of the most iconic publications in the industry. He currently develops content for Bonnier Corporation, the American media company that produces magazines like Saltwater Sportsman, Marlin, Sportfishing, Yachting, Boating, and Sailing World, among others. Jim develops content for boating, Saltwater Sportsman, and Sportfishing, and for the last decade has been the West Coast electronics editor for the Bonnier Fishing Group. He has served as the editor of Trailer Boat Magazine for 14 years, and at the same time was editorial director for Power Boat Magazine. If I remember correctly, Bonnier bought those magazines and then got rid of one of them. I forget which one. 2003, Jim received the prestigious Moulton H. Monk Farnham Award for excellence in editorial commentary. He has got a wealth of fishing and boating experience from around the world, but most of his life he's chosen to focus on fishing from his own boat in Southern California. Now, I've been fortunate to have fished with Jim a couple of times, once from his own boat in Southern California and once out of Laredo, Mexico. And it's a story I'm hoping we're going to get a chance to relive a little bit of today, Jim. So, Jim, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks. It's a thrill to be here with you. Said, I wish we were out fishing, but this is the next best thing.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about the boating industry, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. And, you are, the expert in the boating. And at the end of 2021, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, the NMMA, reported that retail sales for power boats had exceeded 300,000 units for the second year in a row. And that's only the second time in the last 15 years that that's happened. So there's been a strong demand for boats these last 2 years, but for all kinds of reasons, ranging from supply chain issues, getting components from Asia, and even limited employment at manufacturer plants. The industry just can't keep up with demand. As someone who's really tied to the pulse of that industry, what's your read on what's happening with boat sales right now?
Well, it's a great thing. So many people became interested in boating back around. The boating industry kind of took a little bit of dive at the onset of this thing we call COVID. And then a couple of months later, people began to realize that, hey, great way to social distance is getting out on the water. So boat sales at that stage went through the roof. People along with other recreational equipment like RVs, but boats especially, they just took off. And unfortunately, it caught the boating industry by surprise. Who knew that a pandemic would spur boat sales? And now here we are, 18, 24 months later, the boat industry is continuing to try to play catch up and supply the demand for motors and electronics and boats. Some people ordering boats aren't going to be receiving them until next year. So it's a great thing. People are buying boats like crazy. Unfortunately, they're a little frustrated sometimes because they can't get everything that they need, including service. So, but I think it's delightful. I see it here in Southern California where I am. The waters are more crowded than ever before with boating anglers in particular. Everybody wants to get out on their boat now. And it's I think this is going to have a very lasting effect on boating and fishing. I think people are going to continue to want to go out and boat and fish for a long, long time.
Yeah, one of the things we're seeing, and we look at the data from this last year, marine manufacturing, provides about 690,000 jobs in the U.S. And with this increase in boating sales, what we're seeing also is that boating and fishing have become the number one contributor to the $689 billion outdoor recreational economy. And fishing and boating bring in more money now than RVing, hiking, just about every other outdoor recreational activity out there. In fact, I just read a statistic the other day that in 2020, the economic contribution from boating and fishing increased by 30% over 2019. That to me seems pretty indicative of a thriving industry.
Well, it is thriving. It definitely is thriving. And you go to the boat shows and you see that people are, I'm going to be going next month to the Miami International Boat Show. I can't wait.
We should get together and have a drink, man, because I'll be there.
I think that'll happen. But it's very exciting. It's a very exciting market, and I love seeing the boating and the fishing markets just take off like they are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You pointed out too, this caught everybody by surprise because it's not just the boating industry that can't keep up with the demand, but the fishing industry too. Tackle shops are empty because they just can't get stuff on the shelves these days.
That's right. And there's, what happens is there's a great temptation now because the prices for things have people are paying more money than you would imagine for prices. There are no bargains per se anymore when it comes to boating and fishing equipment. So there's great temptation to say, hey, I got a boat, I can get more money now than I could ever get before. I'm going to go ahead and sell it on the used boat market. But the problem with that is, yeah, you will get some more money for it than you would normally, but you're going to be without a boat. And as you and I discussed earlier, it's no fun being without a boat.
Yep.
It's just not. So my advice is, yeah, you can go ahead and sell your boat, but don't wait until you have another boat lined up and you're about ready to take delivery. That's my advice.
Yeah, I really just had that exact same conversation not 2 weeks ago with the guy that I bought my boat from. And he said, if you sell this now, you will not have a boat for at least a year. And who wants to be without a boat for a year?
Yeah, if you're lucky,
Right.
That's the way the market is right now. Boats are just getting snapped up, and as quick as the manufacturers can build them, they're selling the boats.
Well, speaking of boats, I read somewhere that you've tested over 100 different fishing boats. So with that kind of experience, what are the boats that stand out to you? I mean, historically over your career, but also now?
Well, I have to be careful because I don't want to offend anybody. Being in the magazine business, I have to try to be as impartial as possible. But certainly the new breed of big center consoles have impressed me a great deal. From manufacturers like, I'm just going to throw out a few names: CV, Invincible, Contender, Everglades, Boston Whaler. I'm sure I'm missing some there, but they're all great boats. Yellowfin's another one that I should throw into the mix. But the new breed of center consoles are outstanding. All those boats are built well. They're all built with high quality materials. The fit and finish and the rigging is immaculate. The motors are powerful. And what we're seeing is, we're seeing center consoles now reaching upwards of, a 45 footer is not unusual. That's not exactly on the high side. I've seen center consoles up to 65 feet in length now, and that's rivaling, diesel powered sport fishers in terms of size and tonnage. But the center consoles are so much faster, so much more fun to run, easier to handle. You can even handle these single-handed. So, and the other thing is that the types and shapes of hulls are evolving. So now we're seeing a lot of catamaran hulls, power cats coming out from companies like Freeman and Invincible, and Yellowfin has one, and Barker has one. Now they're big, stable catamaran hulls. A lot of them with as many as 4 outboards on them. Big, powerful, 400 horsepower, 425 horsepower outboards on the back. And we just came back from Crystal River, where we fished on a big 40-foot Freeman, and it had 2 rows of seating. Helm seating, one for the captain and his companions, and a second row that would accommodate 3 more people. It was like sitting in the back of a Mercedes-Benz being driven across the water. It was so comfortable. I can't, to me, if somebody had said to me, 10 years ago, you're going to be seeing, 40-foot, 50-foot center consoles out there fishing all the time, I would have said, no, you're crazy. It's not ever going to happen. But it's happened. So it tells you how I really don't know what the future is going to bring. I can't predict, but I think it's a great development. And those boats are selling as fast as 25 footers.
Yeah. So speaking of center consoles, recently the Boat Buyer's Guide for 2022 came out, and you wrote about center consoles in that issue. And one of the things you talk about is that if you're buying a center console for offshore fishing, that a buyer should look closely at the boat's deck. Can you talk a little bit more about that advice?
Okay, well, the main thing on a fishing center console now is you want to look for a level deck. I've tested too many boats that had a kind of a stair step up to the bow. So some I've seen that have 2 stair steps, up to the bow. And I've actually seen a few accidents where somebody was pinned on a pilchard, was racing forward to the bow to throw at some dolphin that were under some sargassum. ran right into that stair step, fell down and onto their elbows and skinned themselves up pretty good. So the first thing I would say is look for a level deck from transom up to all the way up to there might be a raised casting platform up in the bow. That's okay. But you don't want any stair steps in between those two. So that's very important. You're also looking for non-skid nowadays. The wet deck is, once again, you can fall and take a spill on a wet deck and hurt yourself. And a lot of boats now have, I call it, one of the brands is Sea Deck, but it's closed foam non-skid onto the deck. Very comfortable. I've done testing on that non-skid. It works better than diamond non-skid. I'll say that. And very comfortable on bare feet. It's like wearing flip-flops without flip-flops on.
Right.
And of course, then you also want a self-bailing deck, so that if you take water or you wash down the boat, the water's going to drain out through the scuppers. So those are the main things that you want to look for in the deck. But I would say always look for a level deck. Virtually all the fishing boat manufacturers now are producing those kind of decks.
You also, when you're talking about center consoles, you've provided some interesting advice about live well capacities for offshore angling as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that, to me, I found really striking, because you were sort of saying, look, you don't have to go with the traditional live wells. There are a lot of different kind of options now.
Well, yeah, having grown up fishing here in Southern California, basically, and you've been on my boat, you've seen that our boats are nothing more than a way to deliver live bait from the harbor out to all the offshore grounds to go fishing. That's what it's all about. I have a 21.5-foot boat right now, and I have 3 bait tanks on it. We call them bait tanks in Southern California, but 3 live wells, 2 20-gallon wells in the stern, and another 30-gallon well on the deck, an upright tank on the deck. So, and for a long time, East Coast boats didn't really, because East Coast anglers and Gulf anglers really didn't fish with live bait that much. They didn't really come with the kind of live bait capacity Southern California anglers wanted. But, over the years, and on the past 20, 30 years now, the live bait fishery on the East Coast, Florida, the Gulf Coast, has just exploded. Live bait is what it's at, where it's at. You can't, I've gone to Key West fishing with the Trossets, and they won't even go fishing unless they have live bait. And sometimes we fish for live bait till noon, and then we go fishing. It's that important. And also live bait, not just for catching fish, but for chumming for fish, is extremely important. So the live wells, the manufacturers now are really recognizing this trend. They're building live wells into the transom. They build live wells into the deck, below deck, what we call slammer wells here in Southern California. And they're also building them into the seat console, the back of the seat console for that houses the helm seats. So you tremendous amount of live bait capacity, and many of them have what I love are they have these viewing windows, so you can actually see the bait without getting up and walking over and lifting up the hatch. So you can actually see what the bait's like. Also, add this: all of the tanks now that we see coming out from the best manufacturers are all pressurized, and that means the lid hatch latches, and the tank fills completely up with water. And why that's important is because you don't want any sloshing of that water inside the live bait well, the live well. As it sloshes, it hurts the bait. It kind of bangs them against the sides of the tank. But once you pressurize that tank and it's completely full of water, now you can, the bait can slosh around quite a bit and it won't get hurt as a result of just being completely enveloped in water.
So I'm going to shift gears on you for a second. In addition to being the boat guy, you're also probably one of the foremost experts in marine electronics. And before we started recording this episode, you and I were talking a little bit about GPS and depth finder chart plotters. So what kind of innovations have you seen in marine electronics that have really changed the game for boaters and anglers?
Well, for anglers in particular, then I'll address that first, because the the development of new and different types of sonars, fish finders, has really changed the game. I'll give you an example. I just about 5 years ago finally switched over from a regular sonar to a chirp sonar, and I went with a big transducer from Airmar, and that has really opened my eyes to what I might have been missing before I actually was using chirp. Now I'm seeing far more fish. I'm marking. One of the problems I recognized I had with my old transducer, which was a non-chirp transducer, is I couldn't mark tuna. I knew there were tuna under the boat at times, but I couldn't mark them. And that told me, well, maybe when I don't know there's tuna, maybe they're there and I'm just not seeing them. Chirp allows you to see those tuna under the boat that I had never seen before. And out here, oftentimes that's how we stop. A lot of times we won't get bit on the troll. We'll be trolling along, and we'll just be kind of eyeballing the fish finder. And suddenly we'll see a few marks on the fish finder, and we'll just stop the boat, pull it back, start ladling chum out the back, and up the tuna come right to the stern of the boat. So that's why, that's one of the huge developments in fish finders these days, and one that I truly appreciate.
So, given all the electronics you've seen, what's the dream piece of electronics for you on your boat, or that other people should be looking at?
Oh, on my boat, or what I would like to have on my boat?
What you would like to have on what's the dream electronic?
Well, nobody really has these in the size of boats that I have, but searchlight sonar is something that a lot of the long range sport fishing boats out of San Diego use. Now, searchlight sonar is a little bit different than a fish finder. It doesn't shoot straight down, and it basically is like underwater radar. So you have a transducer that either electronically or mechanically rotates. It's in a sea chest. You can activate it so it goes down below the bottom of the hull, and then it rotates as they're cruising along offshore, and they can spot schools of tuna or dolphin or even marlin out as far away as a mile from the boat. Wow. So that's a dream piece of electronics. If I were to predict in the future what might occur, I would say that someday that technology will be brought down to size, and we will have searchlight type sonars on boats in the future. For right now, we have scanning sonar, which works pretty good, but it mostly is I'm talking about transducers that have a beam that goes side to side in a very thin swath and marks bottom structure, but can mark bottom structure out to about 100 yards on either side of the boat. And I use that quite extensively as well to find new spots or locate spots for which I might have lost the GPS numbers.
Gotcha. So speaking of numbers and GPS, before we started this conversation, you and I were talking about GPS units. And so I've got to put a new GPS unit on my boat, and I'm looking at something in a 7 or 9 inch model. And, we've talked about Garmin and Lowrance and, some of the other models that are out there. What would you recommend for a smaller boat? I'm running a 21 bay boat, a Tidewater. What do you recommend in that 7 or 9 inch kind of range?
Well, you know what? Here I look at. Basically, I would get a multifunction display. It wouldn't be just a chart plotter. It wouldn't be just a fish finder. It wouldn't be just a radar. It would be a multifunction display that networks with all and can network in the future with new electronics that you want. For example, I have an 12-inch MFD on my 21 footer. You've seen it. It's networked with the chirp sonar that I talked about earlier. It's networked with a broadband radar. It's networked with a scanning sonar. It's networked with my engine, my outboard engine, all through NMEA 2000 networking cables. So I can access all of that data on my multifunction display. One thing I always tell people is get the largest display you can possibly afford. And by the way, the larger they get, they exponentially become more expensive.
Sure.
So you'll go from maybe $900 for a 9-inch display to $2,000 for a 12-inch display to $3,000 for a 16-inch display. So it gets more and more expensive as you go up in size. But I think I forgot the question. So
well, we were talking about recommended GPS, in the 7 or 9-inch model. And as you're talking, part of the reason that I'm looking at 7s and 9s is because my eyes have gotten so bad as I get older that I can't look at the 5-inch Lowrance without stopping to put reading glasses on.
Right. And that's why the large screen is really great, because now you can see it, you can split the screen, you can put the chart plotter on one side, put the sonar on the other side. And but here's what, by the way, all of the brands, all the major brands are good. And I'm talking about Garmin, I'm talking about Simrad, Lowrance, Furuno, Humminbird. I'm probably missing somebody there, but I think I got all the majors. They're all great. But here's what it's like. If I'm buying a new TV set, I go to Best Buy and I look at all the TV screens that and what I do is I look at which picture I like the best, and that's the one I pick. So that's kind of the way it is with multifunction displays nowadays. They all have great networking capabilities. They all have nice, bright color screens. They all have electronic cartography that is more amazing than I've ever seen before. And so I don't think there's a bad choice in the bunch. But I will say this: once you pick a brand, then you're kind of locked in to networking with that brand's peripherals. So if you pick a Garmin, now you're locked into using a Garmin radar. You're locked into using Garmin components and plugins. Same thing with Simrad. Same thing with Furuno. So I would, not in addition to looking at the display, the multifunction display, look at the peripherals and make sure you like those as well, because those are the peripherals you're going to be locked into using going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things I have to keep in mind is that my trolling motor is Humminbird, and so with the Humminbird, I can connect the trolling motor back to the GPS for
right. So, Minn Kota Humminbird have a nice networking capability there. That's very nice.
Yep. So I'm not sure if you told me this or if I read it somewhere in print, but I have a recollection that of all the fishing you've done, that you've claimed that fishing for mahi is your favorite.
It is.
So,
it is.
Is that true? And if so, what is it that puts dolphin fishing on the top of your angling preferences?
I don't know. It's probably because I caught those fish so much when I was a kid. I just grew to love them. They're probably because they're easier to catch than other fish, and so I don't have to worry too much about it. Once you find them, they're going to bite. But no, they bite easily, they quickly, they jump. So I love acrobatic fish. They're beautiful fish to look at. They taste great. What else? And they often school up, so you're going to catch. If you catch one mahi, you're probably going to catch a bunch more along with it. So, I love catching lots of different fish, but mahi is fairly rare occurrence here in Southern California. They come in during the summer, almost every summer, but only for a few weeks. So that time is precious, and I love going out. Other than going down to Baja, as you and I did at one point together.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second, because that was an adventure.
It was. So, but I think I love mahi. But I love, here in SoCal, we have bluefin tuna, we have yellowfin tuna, we have marlin, we have California yellowtail, halibut. You and I caught some rockfish together, and we hooked a few giant sea bass together. Those are all fun fish to catch, and I'll take it. I love all kinds of fishing.
Yeah, I remember one of the things that stands out about when we did fish there off Catalina was we got the opportunity, kind of a rare opportunity, when those Rizzo dolphins came in, and we got to film those, and that was just great. Something that we don't get to see here in Florida. But
yeah, those Rizzos are huge. They're so large, and they almost look like pilot whales. They're so big, and they move in when we get the live squid comes into our waters, because that's their primary forage, is live opalescent squid. And when you see those guys, they're kind of scary. They're big dolphins, and when they go under the boat, it's almost like a whale going under the boat.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we had fun that day. I was thinking about that day, but I was also thinking about, some of the other pieces you've done for, about specific fish species. And I remember a piece you did, and I'll tell you why I remember this piece. But you had written about California sheepshead. And California sheepshead are very different from the sheepshead we have here on the East Coast. But what the reason I remember that was that the pictures that were posted in the online version, there's one of you holding this fish with just this absolute magnificent coloration, with a big black band and that bright red stripe. And then you scroll down a little bit, and there's your son Brandon holding one that has absolutely no color. And I was thinking, Jim must have done this so that he's the one that looks good with exciting fish. So.
They're an interesting fish. I don't, I love catch and release, but that's definitely a fish that I focus on catch and release quite a bit of, because I just think they get a little too pressured. But what happens with those, and we call them sheephead out here, California sheephead. They're a member of the wrasse family, like tautog or blackfish. They're wrasse as well. Hogfish, I think, are wrasse. So and they go through. Let me see. How can I put this? They're hermaphroditic. So they are born as females, and they have that lighter kind of pinkish color to them until they reach a certain age, or they become the dominant sheephead on any particular piece of structure. And that, at that stage, biologists tell me, that triggers them to transition to a male. And then they develop those striking colors with the black head and tail with the red in between and the big hump on their head and a white chin. So they become male, and and then they get big. That's when they get up to 25, 35 pounds, and wow. They are incredibly powerful.
Well, yeah, I just remember seeing those pictures and thinking, God, that's just a really cool looking fish.
So, it is. They will pin you to the rail. I'd love for you to get you on one of those guys, and they will just absolutely pin you to the rail. On the first 10 feet off the bottom, you don't think it's anyone's call as to who's going to win.
Yeah, well, next time I'm out there, hopefully soon, we'll take you up
okay.
on that for sure. So we've been talking about California waters, but given what you do, you fished a lot of places all over the world outside of Southern California, and what you do here in Florida when you're here. And next time you come to Crystal River, you got to let me know. You're an hour away from me, and I don't know
how you missed out on that trip. I'll have to get the coordinator together and make sure you get invited on that one.
Well, I'll take you up on that too. So what are the other places that stand out for you, but best places and best fish?
Oh, okay. Well, I have to say, probably back in the day, my favorite, most fun place to fish was Charlotte Harbor in Florida, on the west coast of Florida. I fished with a couple of friends. They were twin brothers, Frank and Eric Bachnick. And Frank, Mirror. And Frank I think still guides in Charlotte Harbor. But that's when I realized the East Coast of the Florida guys are into live bait now, because we would load. He had a mullet boat back then, and
West Coast.
He would load that mullet boat live well full of pilchards. And then we never fished in the boat. We'd get out of the boat. He'd go up into an area. We'd get out of the boat. We'd load up our little baskets with pilchards, and he would chum. He'd go into the snook hole, and he would chum it up and wait. And those snook would just go crazy. And it wasn't unusual to have 100 snook days back then.
I got to ask you, because I had this exact same experience with them. That big wide beam flat boat that they ran down there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I got that experience for a media event that Bear Advertising was running for Suzuki and Penn, and
right.
I'm wondering, were we on that same trip back then?
We might have been. I was working for Bear back then, and I think I went fishing with the Bachnicks to see what it was like. I had to go out and do some site inspection, and I came back and I said, this is a trip we have to take editors on. So we ended up doing quite a few trips with with the Bachniks fishing for those snook, and that wasn't the only thing we caught. I mean, there would be acres and acres of redfish at times, and then it was just topwater lures. Just throw out whatever you could and get them to come in. They were so thick. I remember we'd draw them in with a topwater. They'd run through our legs because we were waiting, and occasionally one would run into us, and it was like getting hit in the shin with a ball peen hammer. They were these big fat redfish, and it was the funnest fishing ever. I have to tell you.
Yeah, I now that I did that exact same thing with them. You had the little mesh floating bags behind you with all the pilchards in it, and we'd wade up and down about waist deep, and lots of snook, lots of redfish.
I remember wading along, looking for redfish. I had that bag trailing behind me. All of a sudden, something's tugging on.
This is the shark story. I know this story. I've heard this from Eric. Yeah, I know this story.
And it was a nurse shark. He wanted my bait.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we were there together at one time or another, because
we might have been, Sid. My memory's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah, I'll have to go back through the pictures and see if you're in any of my photos from then. I was writing for the Fisherman magazine back then. I was writing for that weekly.
Yeah. So let's see the other place. I've been to lots of fun places, but I would say that the trips down to Baja California have been some of the most memorable, some of the most exciting. Fishing down there, I remember one year when I was just out of high school, we went down there and we caught. And this is incredible to say, because I thought it was normal at the time. We went out on one trip and caught 13 roosterfish in one morning. The smallest, I think, was 50 pounds, and the biggest was 65 pounds. And I thought, wow, this is pretty fun. Well, I'll have to come back and do this again. I've never heard of anybody doing that since then.
Wow.
one or two or three roosterfish made a morning.
Was that from the beach, or was that?
That was from a boat, charter boat that we took out. That was out of Mulegé, and which is pretty far up north in that, on the peninsula in the Sea of Cortez. So we had a lot of fun. I've gone out, and then we've done a lot of fishing in the Mulegé River for Pacific snook and snapper that look a lot like mangrove snapper, but they're actually dog snapper on the Pacific side. And my brother and I used to have just a blast fishing in the river, fishing along the shorelines, catching snook and corvina and snapper and cabrilla, and getting our butts kicked by a lot of big fish back in the day. So that was some of the most memorable fishing ever, I think, as a kid anyway.
That sounds great. So let's talk about Baja.
Okay.
I've been prompting it since we started talking, but you and I had a heck of an experience a couple of years back on a media trip. Some great people on that trip. Joe Shields, the editor of Virginia Sportsman, Brian Hendricks out of Arkansas Gazette, a couple of other West Coast guys from B&D, from Bloody Decks, and your son Brandon was with us as well. And we got to do some fishing in a rather interesting way.
Yeah, that's the thing about fishing is, and I was talking, to someone the other day, is, if you want adventure, go fishing, because you never know what's going to happen. And it started from before we left the dock.
Right. Because we got to the dock. Everybody has to understand we were there for this big fishing tournament. And we got to the dock and we're all excited because there were all these big, beautiful, sponsored boats. There was a boat sponsored by Okuma and some other big fishing boats for this big fishing tournament. And what do they put us on?
It was a panga. No, it was a super panga is what they called it.
It was a super panga. Right. And the captain doesn't speak English, and none of our Spanish is good enough to communicate with him very well. And as we head out, and so it's you and me, Brian Hendricks from Arkansas, and your son Brandon, and we realized we're supposed to be going fishing, but there was no fishing tackle on this boat other than what you happened to have brought.
Thank goodness brought some tackle with us, huh?
Yeah. Otherwise we were on a fishing trip with no fishing tackle.
I know, that was insane. And the boat itself was in a state of horrible disrepair. I
Well, remember there was no gas cap, and every time we'd lurch, there were little sloshes of gasoline coming out of the gas tank.
That's right. There was no gas cap, and the outboard engine, I won't name the brand, but it was about a 40, 50 horse outboard engine, burned a quart of oil every 10 miles. Do you remember that?
That's right. We had to keep stopping and put oil in it. That's right.
And it wasn't a 2-stroke, it was a 4-stroke.
Right.
I looked down and I saw the bilge pump, and it was, the wires were just simply twisted together with somebody just twisted them together with their hand. I was like, well, at least it has a bilge pump. That's the good news.
I remember, Brandon was throwing out little baits and catching little mahi,
Right.
little peanuts and chickens. And I'll also never forget, and I don't mean to make fun of him because I like Brandon a lot. We stay in touch via Facebook. But he was dressed like a mahi that day too.
Yeah, he picks his clothes based on what he wants to catch.
I like it. And he was catching them. He was doing well. And we had seen a couple of makos jump, and we had seen some manta rays jump. Beautiful place to be out there. And then I think, I know I was sitting on the bow, and I saw those 2 black fins come up, and we had marlin in sight. And
I thought we were all here. I'll confess. I thought, oh, this is no way we're going to catch these fish. We were way undergunned. We have these little tiny they were lever drags, but they were small. They were about the size of a bass reel, both of them.
Right.
And I said, and we barely had any bait. And but Brandon, who was like, he had like all the confidence in the world, So it's the confidence of youth, I guess. He said, well, let's put a bait out. Let's catch these guys. Like, all right. So, he pins on a mackerel. He throws it out there, and then and then somebody else, I don't know if it's me or so, I pinned on a mackerel on the other rod, and I threw it out there, and I just kind of set the rod in a rod holder. And Brandon was immediately bit by the marlin. Marlin came up and ate that mackerel, and he put it into gear and around, and summarily was broke. The marlin sawed through the leader. I think we had like a 30-pound leader on there, and off he went. And so he was, heartbroken. But no sooner had he broke off the fish than the other rod that I'd stuck in the rod holder would bent over double. So there were 2 marlin there. And Brian Hendricks, no relation, Brian Hendricks, because he had never caught a marlin before. So we all said, Brian, you take it. Right. Well, I thought he had no chance of landing the fish, but let's go ahead and take it.
Right. And that's the thing. The reason everybody said, yeah, Brian's got to take this is, here's a guy whose specialty is turkey hunting in Arkansas, and he writes about bass fishing.
Right.
And here's a hookup on a marlin. You got to let the guy do it. And here he is hooked up to this marlin on this tiny little rod and reel. And, between you and me and Brandon, we're all just yelling way too many instructions. I've got the whole thing on videotape, and too many cooks in the kitchen at that point, and we're all trying to film it. We're all trying to coach him, but
one of the complicating factors was, in addition to being way undergunned, is he was left-handed and the reel was a right-handed reel.
Right. That's right.
So he's struggling with, just getting his coordination right on that.
Right.
So yeah, his first big game fish, and he's got it on the wrong kind of reel for his dexterity.
Well, the wrong kind of reel for the fish too.
Yeah, exactly. Everything was wrong. But despite all of that, we landed the fish.
We did. We got good photographs. Yeah. And I remember Brian yelling because the captain had yelled, "Come to Papa, come to Papa." And so Brian kept yelling that the rest of the day. I will say, and I don't know what your feelings were on the matter, but here we are with a beautiful billfish alongside the boat. Everybody's taking pictures and film, and all of a sudden the captain just launches out with the gaff and gut gaffs this marlin and brings it up on board. And I don't think any one of us on that boat had ever thought anything other than releasing the billfish. The idea.
Yeah, no, I definitely did not want to keep it. And it came as a complete surprise, particularly since once he gaffed it, he lifted it up and threw it on the deck.
I think
And it
most of us
was,
got cut by the bill, and I knew
yeah,
I
it
got it
was
across
going
the calf.
crazy. Yeah, speaking about getting hit in the shins, I think it banged against my legs about 8 times. It's like, oh, I hope I didn't break a bone here, but
Well,
well, it's Mexico, and I don't think that particular skipper really had ever expected to catch a marlin.
no, I don't think he knew we were actually going fishing. So, I mean, but I mean, I think the other fun part of that moment also was when he was pulling it up. So here's the Pango, which isn't, it's a very narrow beam boat to begin with.
Mhm.
And all of us rushed to that side of the boat. And I'm
Take
holding on to the
pictures,
T-top. Yeah, I thought we were all going over at that point also.
I know. Well, just a great fishing adventure, one that was certainly memorable. And like I say, that's why I don't like going to amusement parks like Disneyland and that stuff, because you know what's going to happen when you go to Disneyland. You never know what's going to happen when you're out on the water.
Absolutely. Disney used to have a quick Disney story. Disney, before they created downtown Disney, they had another area that was bars and restaurants. And I used to walk into these Disney bars and everything was fake. There was fake chewing gum on the floor. There was fake graffiti. And, you've traveled enough, that you can walk into a bar anywhere in the world. And if there's alcohol present, the one thing about a bar is you never really know what could go on there. In a Disney bar, you know exactly what's going to go on there. It's as boring as it can possibly be. But yeah. I also remember on that trip, so part of the trip they had the golf course, and I've never golfed in my life and was completely hungover the day we had to golf, whereas Brandon was all into it and trying to shoot the best game of his life while I was trying to hydrate on the green. But I'll never forget when you and I, the other part of this was checking out their spa, and
Right.
You and I walked into the spa to get our massages. Neither one of us comfortable with the idea of stripping down in front of all these people we've never met to get massages.
I've never had a massage before, so I had no idea what I was supposed to do. In fact, I left my underwear on. I just said, I'm not taking my underwear off.
I remember you walked, they'd given us those robes, and you walked out toward the shower with me, and you go, I left my underwear on. I said, that's good. I left my bathing suit on.
I was afraid what might happen if I didn't. I thought, oh, Mr. Gene, what are you doing?
Oh, good times. So I really appreciate the conversation today. And I got one last question for you that we're asking everybody on the show. And that's, what's your grail fish? What's the fish you still quest for that you really want?
Well, okay, good question. And I actually have two, but the one is a Southern California swordfish. I spent the better part of last year deep dropping with a buddy for swordfish, and it's that fishery is a burgeoning fishery out here. We just figured out how to catch deep drop daytime swordfish here in Southern California, and guys are doing well. Not me, but a lot of guys have done well deep dropping for swords out here. And it's, in fact, I did a story for Saltwater Sportsman recently called Backyard Broadbills, because they're not too far off the beach. We guys are catching them outside Newport Harbor, 2 or 3 miles on the edge of Newport Canyon, deep dropping, something nobody ever knew really existed until a couple of years ago, that the swordfish were out there and how to deep drop for them. So we're figuring that out, but we had bit twice. We had one fish on once and it came unbuttoned. And I want to catch it in my boat, my little boat. Right. I want to catch it. It's important that I catch that fish in my boat. So that is my one, the holy grail that I've really pursued and have not yet succeeded at. The other fish is the opa. And we catch, it's an incidental fish. I don't know that anybody just goes out and targets opa. Some people might think they're rare, but they're not really, because the longliners catch a lot of them.
Yeah, I didn't know they would take a hook. I didn't know they would take a bait. I'd never thought of them as something you would catch. I just assumed.
Yeah. The opa is they're usually caught incidental to tuna fishing. Somebody backlashes and they pull out a backlash and their lure goes to jig, sinks way down. And then when they finally get the backlash out, they put the reel in gear and they're winding it up really fast to get it, do more fishing, and they end up hooking a no-pot, and they're really pretty big, 160, 200 pounders.
Wow.
According to biologists, the only true warm-blooded fish in the ocean.
Wow.
So those are my two holy grail fish.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks, Jim. I really appreciate you joining us here on the Inventive Fishing Professor Show. And I guess I hope to see you in Miami, and we can finish the conversation there.
We will see each other, and we'll have a drink, and we'll tell more stories to each other.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.
All right. See you soon.
Oh man, there is nothing I like more than talking fishing with you out there and the listening crew. You're what makes the Fishing Professor Rodcast so much damn fun. But I think I need a break, and them barking dogs are reminding me that it's time for a bourbon break. When I hear them barking dogs, it's like hearing the school bell, knowing it's time to go to recess. So let's talk bourbon for a few minutes. And today I want to ramble about one of those great bourbons from that great Park City, Utah distillery, High West. And today I want to talk about High West American Prairie Bourbon. Now, I have to say I was first introduced to the High West brands when I was in Park City a few years before their bottles started showing up in Southern State liquor stores. And I fell in love with all those brands pretty quickly. And now I keep several bottles of different High West products on my shelf. But today I'm going to focus on American Prairie Bourbon. One of the appeals of this bourbon is its low price point at about $30 a bottle. I also dig the name of this bourbon and the meaning behind it. The American Prairie name honors the American Prairie Reserve, a nonprofit organization formed in 2001 that is working to create the largest wildlife reserve in the lower 48. You can learn more about their efforts at American Prairie, all one word, .org. High West supports American Prairie's efforts, and the American Prairie Bourbon label depicts a pronghorn antelope. The image was painted by Montana artist Diane Whitehead. The pronghorn antelope is North America's fastest land animal, and their herds have been devastated by 98% since the 1800s. The American Prairie Reserve is intended to provide habitat for the antelope, among other species. That alone deserves more than a toast. It deserves its own bourbon. So High West donates 10% of all of the after-tax profit on American Prairie Bourbon to the American Prairie Reserve. Now, as to the bourbon itself, American Prairie Bourbon is actually a blend of straights that are at least 2 years old. But according to the High West web pages, the ratios of the blends are, quote, top secret. They also don't disclose where they source their bourbons from to make the blend, except to identify MGP, which is a distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, that produces spirits for other companies that are sold by about 50 other companies. MGP has been distilling since 1847. What we do know of the blends, though, is that the mash bill of the bourbon from MGP is 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley. The non-disclosed bourbon's mash bills is something like 84% corn, 8% rye, and 8% malted barley. The blend is aged in new charred oak, but they don't disclose for how long, other than providing a range of 2 to 13 years. The American Prairie Bourbon is a 92 proof bourbon. It has a light leather coloration that resembles the tan saddle fur of the pronghorn antelope. The nose of the bourbon blend is light, with a pleasant orangish smell blended with the sweetness of caramelized sugars. There's also some touches of vanilla bean here and a hint of oak. And I'll admit the nose is not robust. You have to work at it to draw out the individual scents. That lightness follows through in the opening taste, which is dominated somewhat by rye and some spice, with that vanilla bean from the nose lurking in the background. It's all very pleasant, but like the nose, there's nothing vigorous in the taste, just a lot of lithe pleasantness here. There's a bit of increase of spice in the finish, but not much. Look, here's the thing about American Prairie Bourbon. This is a bourbon that is blended from undisclosed source bourbon. It has a massive age range for 2 to 13 years, so there's a lot of uncertainty here. But it has a great feel-good backstory. It's pleasant for drinking, either neat or on ice. It's got a very reasonable price point of $30, so it's going to appeal to a lot of people, including me. This isn't the bourbon I go to when I want to get deep into the metaphysics or ontology of bourbon. It's the bourbon I go to when I want a simple, pleasant drink, and I want to feel good about supporting a good cause while I'm drinking, or at least a better cause than my actual drinking, which is a great cause for all of you to support. So listen, there's a lot of reasons to have a bottle of High West American Prairie blended bourbon around, but none of them are tied to this being a provocative bourbon. This is a humdrum bourbon, but that's okay. It's still pleasant, and as other bourbon breaks have and will discuss, High West's reputation exceeds this one line in their repertoire. So those are my thoughts on High West American Prairie bourbon. But before we put the bottle down and pick the rod back up, and as a final note, and my regular disclaimer, as always, please keep in mind that the Fishing Professor Bourbon Break reviews are not sponsored. The distillers have not sent me samples, nor do they influence my reviews at all. Though I am always open to sponsorship, bribery, and extortion, the bourbons I reviewed are purchased out of pocket, and my reviews are based on the keen sense of bourbon know-how developed over many years in many of the country's finest watering holes, drinking establishments, dives, pubs, honky-tonks, and back alley speakeasies. And since we're talking about High West and Park City, let me give a shout out to the memory of Robert Redford's now permanently closed Zoom restaurant and the bar that used to sit off Main Street in Park City. Man, my friends and I used to have some great times in there while we were out when we got back from trout fishing. And there's one night there that involved a lot of bourbon and a snowball fight inside the bar. Zoom was great. Really going to miss that place. So that's that. And here's to staying positive and testing negative. As always, if you have comments about this week's Bourbon Break, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. That's it for the Bourbon Break. Let's get back to the show. All right, let's turn our attention to the Fishing Professor's top 10 for the week. And this week, I'm going to keep my eyes on some inshore fishing and count down my top 10 favorite shrimp imitators. Now, before I get to the lures themselves, and like I said in the intro to this episode, I've spent a lot of time researching and writing about shrimp imitators. I've written articles for Saltwater Sportsman and Florida Sportsman about artificial shrimp and about shrimp. And I've reviewed a lot of artificial shrimp on the Inventive Fishing web pages and also on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. So I tend to be pretty particular about what artificial shrimp I use. So I need to point out that there are so many shrimp imitators out there, and just about every company, whether a small garage-based company or a big-time manufacturer, well, they all make some kind of shrimp lure, especially if they're in the business of making soft plastics. And part of the reason for this is that if you correlate the importance of shrimp as a forage species in just about every inshore fishing environment with the possibility that anglers are going to want to exploit the ubiquity of shrimp by always having some kind of shrimp imitator, you can see why it makes good business sense to make some kind of shrimp imitator if you're in the lure business. Shrimp occur in every ocean on the planet, and they're primary forage for just about every fish out there. So most lure manufacturers have some kind of shrimp imitator. And a lot of the shrimp lures that are out there are soft body plastics, and there are a few hard body shrimp out there as well, and we'll talk about some of those. There are plenty of scented shrimp lures, and there are plenty that are not scented. But I'm going to keep this simple and not distinguish between different kinds of shrimp lures. These are just my 10 favorites. These are the artificial shrimp that I fish with the most, but you have to understand that I have a bin full of other shrimp lures that I have bought over the years that just don't live up to these 10. In some instances, too, ranking one lure above or below another is tough because they both perform admirably. So really, you should think of this list as all top-notch, effective, reliable artificial shrimp. And just as a reminder, the Fishing Professor Rodcast is not sponsored by anyone, so there is no manufacturer influence on this list. It's my honest list. This is really the shrimp that I use. So let's kick it off at number 10 with Paul's Dinkum Shrimp from Unfair Lures. Now, this is a hard body lure that has a great natural look of a shrimp and a great directional presentation. I know that when Paul Van Reenen designed this shrimp, he paid a lot of attention to the details of the shrimp's movement in the water, particularly its backwards retreat when threatened. The shrimp does a great job of imitating a retreating shrimp. At number 9, I've got Berkeley Gulp Alive Shrimp. The gulp shrimp is a go-to for so many anglers I know. It's a scented body, soft body, that is packaged in a liquid solution to make sure the lure is always infused with the scent. And really, it's that scent that makes the gulp shrimp so popular. The focus of the lure design is on the material and the scent, not necessarily the lifelike visual qualities of the shrimp. Anyone who fishes gulp will tell you that they're messy, but they're really effective lures. At number 8, I've got one of the toughest, most durable shrimp bodies out there, the Monster 3X X-Move shrimp. This is a soft body lure made from a really strong TPE plastic, making it one of the most rugged soft body shrimp out there. The X-Move shrimp has a segmented tail that kicks and flutters like a live shrimp's tail when twitched and retrieved. Very, very lifelike. It's also very versatile in terms of rigging, whether rigged with a weighted jig head, a plain hook, or with a drop weight. You can rig this shrimp pretty much any way you want. Now, the other thing I should point out about the Monster 3X X-Move shrimp is that the plastic is very interactive with other plastics. So you absolutely have to store Monster 3X lures separate from other lures or they're going to melt. This isn't a big deal, and I just keep my Monster 3X lures in a box by themselves. Given the strength of these lures, keeping a separate box for them seems like a fair trade-off. If you want to see my full review of the Monster 3X Move shrimp, you can find it on the Inventive Fishing webpage and at theinventivefishing.com or the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. Okay, at number 7, I've got Z-Man Easy Shrimp. The Z-Man Easy Shrimp is a redfish slayer. I love this soft body shrimp. I love that you can get them pre-rigged with a weighted hook and that the unrigged can either serve as a replacement for the rigged shrimp when it's worn out, or it allows you to rig the shrimp however you'd like. I love the flutter of the Easy shrimp tail that happens because of the segmented tail design. It also has great flutter movement in its thin little shrimp legs, adding to the realistic visual presentation. The lure is made from Z-Man's Elastec plastic, which is a very rugged and resilient plastic. This is a great shrimp for fishing under a popping cork too. It's a 3.5-inch shrimp and it comes in 10 color options. I'm putting Live Target's rigged shrimp in the number 6 position. This is one of the most realistic looking shrimp out there. It's kind of a hybrid hard body and soft body lure that's available in a 3 and a 4-inch model and in 11 colors. I've had consistent luck with the 3-inch versions in the sand shrimp, glass shrimp, glow shrimp, and brown shrimp variations. The one thing you need to know about the swimming action of this lure is, unlike some of the other shrimp imitators that work to depict a fleeing or panicking shrimp, which swims backwards when under duress, the Live Target rigged shrimp imitates a shrimp swimming in its forward, relaxed swimming motion. It's also got an internal rattle that mimics the popping sound of a shrimp, that a shrimp would make while swimming. It really is a fantastic shrimp imitator. Okay, at number 5, I'm going with an iconic lure, probably the most important shrimp lure in the history of designing shrimp lures. It's the most often copied shrimp body design out there, and I'm talking, of course, about DOA's shrimp. This really is the gold standard in shrimp. I've been fortunate to have had a few opportunities to talk with Mark Nichols about why and how he designed the DOA shrimp as he did, and I've also spent a significant amount of time reviewing Mark's patents for the shrimp. Now, what makes Mark's design so great, and he told me about how much time he invested in getting this aspect of the shrimp right, is that the shrimp falls horizontal like a shrimp does when settling down from the water to a solid surface. If you've ever watched a shrimp swim, when it rests, it settles not with its head up or tail up, but horizontally. The DOA shrimp has this action down perfect. That's in part due to the internal weight of the lure, which also makes this a very castable lure. The DOA shrimp is available in 5 sizes, ranging from 2 inches to 6 inches. I rely a lot on the original 3-inch model, but I have to say that I absolutely love throwing the big 6-inch version to snook and big redfish. All in all, the DOA shrimp is a must-have shrimp in your arsenal. That said, there are some newer shrimp designs that have become very predominant in the lure market, and for a good reason. They are innovations that just really improve the possibilities of artificial shrimp. And they are remarkably good at enticing the bite. So with a nod to Mark Nichols and the DOA shrimp for revolutionizing shrimp lures, I turn my final 4 as the new generation of designers and lures that have pushed artificial shrimp design to the next level. So at number 4, I've got Savage Gear's 3D Manic Shrimp. This is another great lure design from Mads Grossel, one of the premier designers working in the lure industry right now. Like many of the other Savage Gear lures, Mads uses 3D scans of live shrimp to get his lifelike shape and movements for the lure. The Savage Gear 3D Manic Shrimp has a segmented tail that is infused with a nylon mesh. This gives the tail a great kicking action, and the nylon mesh, when combined with the ultra soft TPE plastic of the body, makes the shrimp really rugged. That internal mesh and the tough plastic prevents tears, particularly on short bites. The Manic Shrimp comes rigged with a weighted hook that is low profile enough to be as close to weedless as you can get. There are 3 size options for the Manic Shrimp, a 2.5, a 4, and a 5-inch version, and they come in 10 color options. This really is one of the best shrimp imitators out there, though I guess we could call them shrimmitators. And yes, I've reviewed the Savage 3D Manic Shrimp, and you can watch that review on the Inventive Fishing web pages at inventivefishing.com or on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. At number 3, I want to go with a recent addition to the artificial lure market, Chase Bait's Flick Prawn Shrimp. Chase Baits is an Australian company that has been making big splashes in the U.S. market in the last couple of years. They have some great saltwater lures, and among those, I've come to really respect their take on the shrimp lure with the Flick Prawn Shrimp lure. Like other new shrimp designs, the Flick Prawn is incredibly lifelike, both in terms of visual appearance and lifelike movement in the water. One of the things I like about the Flick Prawn, too, is that it comes rigged with a weighted hook that is painted to match the soft body of the lure. The hook is also rigged weedless, which I like when fishing in grass and rocky environments. Comes in 2 sizes, a 3.74-inch and a 4.92-inch version, and is available in 7 color patterns. Chase Bait's Flick Prawn is just a great shrimp imitator, whether you're fishing it under a popping cork or jigging it along the bottom. In my runner-up spot at number 2, I have got another of the most recently introduced shrimp imitators to the lure market, the winner of the 2018 ICAST Best Saltwater Lure Product Showcase, and now an even higher honor by being named the number 2 all-time favorite shrimp lures by me, the fishing professor. I give you Live Target's Fleeing Shrimp. Like the name says, the swimming action of this shrimp lure mimics a shrimp fleeing, which means the lure appears to swim backwards with a snapping motion. The lure achieves this through its silicone skirt that moves great in the water and on the retrieve to mimic the action of a shrimp's front legs when fleeing a predator. The remainder of the body is a durable, tough plastic, and the tail of the lure is a weighted jig head. The profile of the lure is incredibly lifelike, and it comes with an internal glass rattle to create an auditory attractant through its clicking sound, like the clicking of a fleeing shrimp. It's also a scented lure. That gives this lure 3 sensory attractants: smell, sight, and sound. And yes, I've reviewed this one too, and you can check that out on that video gear review out at inventivefishing.com or on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. All right. So that brings me to my number 1 favorite artificial shrimp. But before we get to it, let's get a quick recap of the top 9 Bubba Gump style: Paul Dinkum shrimp, Berkeley Gulp Alive shrimp, Monster 3XX Move shrimp, Z-Man Easy shrimp, Live Target Rig shrimp, DOA shrimp, Savage Gear Manic shrimp, Chase Bait Flick Prawn shrimp, Live Target Fleeing shrimp. All right. And that brings us to the fishing professor's number 1 favorite artificial shrimp, and that is Voodoo Shrimp by Egret Baits. Now, I love what Ken Shomon has done with Egret Baits and his shrimp design, and the Voodoo Shrimp is just excellent. And yes, I reviewed the Voodoo Shrimp a few years back, and the review is still available at inventivefishing.com and on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. And in the time since doing that review, I've become even a bigger fan of the Voodoo Shrimp. This is a rugged, soft-body shrimp that holds up against toothy bites. The soft body has a Kevlar mesh woven through the body to give strength to that body and to help resist tears and short bite rips. It's got a segmented tail and great front legs that contribute to a real lifelike motion when the lure is retrieved or jigged. It comes pre-rigged with a weighted hook and fishes just great under a popping cork or when cast and jigged. Has a great color option array, and Egret Baits has recently added 10 new colors to the Voodoo Shrimp palette. All in all, my absolute favorite shrimp imitator. And that does it for the Fishing Professor's Top 10 for the week. Of course, I'm sure you've got your favorites too, and I'm sure that most of you will probably disagree with my selections or rankings. And if you do, hey, well, it's all good. As always, if you've got a shrimp lure you think I should check out, shoot me an email at sid@inventiveFishing.com. And as always, if you'd like a Fishing Professor's Top 10 about a particular fishing-related thing, send me an email and I'll see about adding it to my list for future Top 10s. All right, let's get back to it. Well, that about wraps things up for another episode of the Fishing Professor Rodcast, and what a fun show it's been. I can't say thank you enough to Jim Hendricks of Saltwater Sportsman and Sportfishing magazine for that great conversation. Jim's columns are standouts in those publications, and I really think that anyone who wants to improve their fishing and boating know-how ought to be reading his stuff as often as possible. Now, before I sign off today, I do have a message for our brothers and sisters out there behind the line. The fish are on the reef. I say again, the fish are on the reef. And that just about brings us to the end of this week's Rodcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. We've got a great new episode coming up next week, and I hope you'll give a listen as soon as it drops next week. Do remember that all new episodes drop every Wednesday. As always, please be sure to share the Fishing Professor Rodcast with everyone you know, and I'm guessing you know an angler or two. There are so many ways to access the Rodcast, so you and your buddies can always listen on your favorite platform. You'll find the Rodcast on our hosting site at thefishingprofessor.podbean.com and on the Podbean app, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Player FM, the Samsung Podcast, and Podchaser. As always, if you have a comment or question about anything on this week's show or have specific recommendations for future Top 10s, Bourbon Breaks, or interviews, please feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com or leave a reply in any of the comment sections for any of the podcast platforms you listen to the Rodcast on. Hey, and be sure to check out the Inventive Fishing web pages, and be sure to follow us on Twitter and friend us on Facebook at Inventive Fishing. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. I guess we should change it. Keep fishing until then. I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, this is Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor. Fish on.
The Fishing Professor Show is copyrighted by Inventive Fishing, LLC. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the consent from Inventive Fishing, LLC is strictly prohibited. Fish on!